What were Palpatine's complicated feelings after killing his master Darth Plagueis? Greetings, students of the Force, and welcome to the Archives. Recently, we talked about the very moment that Sidious slew his master, the spiteful but oddly touching speech that he gave to Plagueis while doing so. But of course, it doesn't end here, as there is always more to the story. Once it was all said and done, Sidious became acutely aware that he was the last of his kind in the galaxy. When that dawned on him, he had a storm of feelings and emotions in a moment where he released his true self in the privacy of his luxurious penthouse. In today's holocron, we are going to be reading and detailing exactly how Sidious felt immediately after killing Plagueis, and how in his moment of triumph, he was also incredibly lonely. Before we dive into this one, we wanted to remind you all that we do read your comments and take your suggestions, so if you happen to have an idea for a holocron topic that you would like us to explore, please leave it in the comments down below, and be sure to force crush that subscribe button. Now, students of the Force, let us begin with today's Sith holocron. To no one's surprise, from the moment Plagueis' life had been extinguished, the first thing Sidious would feel was victory and a rising sense of power. The Force swirled around Sidious like a vortex. The dark side within him was filling him so completely that the Sith Lord feared he may simply disappear into it, never to return. The most potent connection to the dark side Palpatine had ever felt up until this point. In a moment of pure elation, one so rare when serving the dark side, according to the book, Sidious heard voices whispering to him from the great beyond. The novel says this: a welter of voices, near and far, present and from eons past, drowned Sidious's thoughts. Raised in praise, the voice proclaimed his reign and cheered the inauguration of a brand new order. These were the whispers of the deceased Dark Lords acknowledging Sidious's rightful rulership, his inheritance of the Banite lineage. In this extremely strange moment, we look into what it truly felt like to ascend to a level of the Dark Lord. Very rarely in the lore are we given such a candid insight on how one feels losing themselves in the great power of the Force. And in this moment, the dark side had ordained Sidious. Palpatine was in such a state that he wondered if this was how Plagueis felt after killing his own master Tenebris. But Palpatine reluctantly pulled himself back from the swirl of feelings and emotion, turning his attention back to Plagueis' body. The room he was in complete disarray. Furniture was overturned, expensive objects lay askew, and just about everything was destroyed. All of this had been from when Sidious unleashed a wave of Force energy from himself in the moment where he killed Plagueis. But all of a sudden, a strange fear gripped the new Dark Lord. Sidious suddenly was uncertain whether Plagueis was dead or not. He had watched as his master had played yo-yo with the life of Venomous. Plagueis indeed knew how to manipulate the midichlorians to save someone from dying, and Sidious was concerned that he could now do the same for himself, and that his master's death was an act, a trick. A rush of thoughts went through Sidious's mind as he wondered if Plagueis had actually achieved immortality. Slowly and cautiously, Palpatine approaches the dead moon's body and uses the Force to flip him over, keeping his distance. Sidious stared intently, but upon seeing the pale, lifeless corpse releasing its last pocket of oxygen, Sidious felt a tremendous amount of relief. Darth Plagueis was indeed dead. With that knowledge in mind, Sidious returned to his spot on the window to look out at the stars and be alone with his thoughts. His mind, though, would quickly turn to a threat: the Jedi. Palpatine wondered if the sudden shift in the Force had been potent enough to have been sensed by his enemies as well. If the Jedi were tapped in enough to the Force to recognize that the dark side had moved in a dramatic way, he feared the Jedi could feel this as well. It had happened all in their backyard of Coruscant. Palpatine even wonders if it would be enough to shake them from their self-righteous and blind ways. Had this all been a mistake? Did Palpatine kill his master too early, too close to the Jedi? This is when Palpatine began to unravel his plans like a puzzle. The end of Darth Plagueis would mark his beginning, and all of his schemes for the galaxy would now come together immaculately. It's this moment that the novel tells us this. In his mouth, Sidious tasted the tang of blood. In his chest, he felt the monster rising, emerging from the shadowy depths and contorting his aspect into something fearsome, just sort of revealing itself to the world. The dark side had made him its property, and now he had made the dark side his. In this depraved covenant with evil, Palpatine's true countenance was beginning to emerge. The wrinkled, yellow-eyed face that we often associate with Sidious, in actuality, was his true face. It was who he was, deep down. The Force lightning simply revealed the monstrosity below, the one lurking just beneath the surface. And in this moment, that face was almost revealed too early, simply due to how much of the dark side was swelling within Palpatine. With all of that said, something was shading Palpatine's sense of triumph. The book tells us that Sidious has a vague awareness of a power greater than himself. He wondered if it was Plagueis reaching out from the far side of death in order to haunt and vex his apprentice. Or maybe it was him standing in awe of himself. But of course, what Palpatine did not know was that in this exact moment across the galaxy, Qui-Gon Jinn had just died. And in his death, Qui-Gon had become far more powerful than one could imagine, transcending into the netherworld of the Force, becoming a Force ghost, a rare thing now. With this odd sensation moving across his body, Sidious would feel something else that surprised him, a sense of loss and profound solitude. He would only ever find this out later, after his election to the Supreme Chancellorship and his arrival to Naboo, but his apprentice Maul had presumably been killed as well. Having killed Plagueis in a single moment, and then Maul falling to the Jedi in the next, Sidious's moment of glory was turned to one of solace and contemplation. Out of a galaxy of trillions, he was currently the only one of his kind, the last Sith, the only true one at least. He was alone, just as Darth Bane had been alone. As a young man, Palpatine had had friends, and even a family, although he hated them intensely, but they were still there. When that was over, Palpatine had moved on to becoming mentored by Plagueis through his formative years. Then he trained Maul. Despite knowing many people in the Senate, there were a precious few who knew who Sidious truly was. There was Sate Pestage at that point, but he was simply a fanatic who worshipped the Sith, who worshipped Palpatine. With Plagueis and Maul gone, Sidious was alone for the first time in his life. He had nothing but himself and the dark side. The book highlights a strangely human moment for Sidious, but of course that doesn't mean that he actually missed either of the two Sith Lords. This was more of a product of loss of companionship within the grand plan. Palpatine would be forced to rebuild, and he would need a new apprentice to keep the Sith alive and the plan moving forward, which of course would turn out to be Dooku. Upon arriving to Naboo though, Palpatine had desperately wanted to press one of the Jedi how Maul had managed to kill a Jedi Master, blade to blade, but had been overcome by a simple Jedi Padawan. But interestingly, Sidious decided at the last moment that he did not want to know what happened with Maul. Ignorance to Sidious in this moment was bliss, and he didn't want to be internally shamed by Maul's failure even more than he already was. He did not need the details. What was done was done. These were the incredibly complicated feelings of Sidious following the death of Plagueis. A storm of many things, as one doesn't just become the Dark Lord of the Sith every day. With our reading, we bore witness to a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Sidious took a moment to bathe in the dark side as the galaxy shifted around him. But now, students of the Force, we would love to hear what you think of this moment. Did you know Palpatine's thoughts and emotions after Plagueis' death? A profound sense of loneliness, and even an inkling of fear. But how do you interpret this moment for Palpatine? A sense of loss and loneliness both for Plagueis and Maul. Was he sensing something greater? And what are your thoughts on Palpatine's ascension as the Dark Lord? As always, my friends, thank you so much for joining us for today's Holocron opening. And as always, may the Force be with you in all of its forms.